Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom and Facebook Live. Good to see all of you. As usual, I'll be paying attention to your live comments, to the comments in the chat box, hopefully, and hopefully I'll get a chance to see the Facebook Live comments as well. So feel free to ask questions, make some comments as we go through the story. So the topic tonight is a very fascinating one. It's the story of the lost tribes of Israel, the mystery of the lost tribes of Israel. Now, if you never heard of the lost tribes and you don't know the story, no need to worry. We'll talk all about the story, about the history, everything that happened before, some of what happened afterwards, and we'll try to answer some important questions like, where are the lost tribes and are they coming back? And to understand why this might be relevant nowadays as well. So let's get right to it. We have to go back a little bit in time, talk about the history. We'll go back to the times of King David and his son, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. For that, I'd like to share my screen for a bit, and we'll jump back and forth between the Zoom and the screen share, which is a small presentation that we'll be referring to. Okay, so hopefully you could see the screen. And here we have the mystery of the lost tribes, and we're going to start talking about, if I could go to the next screen. Okay, so we're going back to the year 877 BCE, where we have King David. David HaMelech becomes the king, and his reign lasts for 40 years until he passes away. When he passes away in the year 837 BCE, his son, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, he is the one who succeeds his father, King David, and he becomes the king. King David is, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is a very wise king. There are many stories told about King Solomon. He's very wealthy. He has very large building projects. He builds many palaces, and also he's the one who builds the very first holy temple. So it was his father, King David, who secured the land on the Temple Mount, and that was the place that was chosen for the holy temple to be built. But King Solomon, his son, was the one who actually built the first temple. Now, at this time, at this moment in history, Israel was a united nation. It was a united country. And as you can see on this map, Israel was divided into 12. And the reason for this is because there were 12 tribes, and each tribe, according to their population and some other factors, each tribe received a piece of land in the land of Israel. And here you can see all of the 12 plots. You have two and a half tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. And then the rest of the 9.5 other tribes are in Israel proper. And so Israel is a united country, but there's some tension between the north and the south. And the reason for this is mostly because of course, people living all around the country, but the kings were always from the tribe of Judah. So this would probably be viewed by many people as unfair. Certainly the other tribes could think that this is unfair, that the king always comes from the tribe of Judah. So there's certain tension between the north and the south. The north, where you have most of the tribes, and the south, where you have Judah, the tribe of Judah, and the capital, Jerusalem, which was just on the border of that piece of land. Now, a wise king would have to be extremely sensitive and aware of these feelings and these sensitivities that these other tribes have, in order to keep the peace and to keep the unity within the country, and to keep it one united country. Now, King Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, passes away in the year 796. And following his death, his son Rechavam, he becomes the next king. He becomes the successor of King Solomon. Now, at this time, the northern tribes send a delegation over to the capital, to Jerusalem, to share their complaints with the new king, the new government, and so that their voices can be heard. And their most important complaint was about the burden of taxes that was really taking a toll on the people. King Solomon had all of these building projects, including the most important project, the Holy Temple, the Bet HaMikdash. But all of these taxes that would be used, all of the money came from the taxpayers, and all of these taxes were taking a very heavy toll on the people, and the tribes of the north sent a delegation to see what they could do, to change this, and to get a better deal, and perhaps to get some of their taxes off. Now the new king Rechavam, he doesn't know exactly what he should do, so he goes to his advisors to see what they recommend. So the older advisors, the ones who are still around the ones who served King Solomon, they recommended to go easy on the people. They said, speak to the people gently, make it easy for them, and then they will be your servants forever. The younger advisors, however, said, no, you're the new king, you're young, you need to show them who's boss. So the king had these different pieces of advice. The older advisors were saying, go easy on the people, and the younger advisors were saying, go tough on the people. What does Rechavam do? He listens to the young advisors and he decides to go tough on the people. And this is what he says to the people, to the delegation that came from the north. He says like this, and this comes from the prophets. You could see the source. My father, this is reference to King Solomon, my father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpion thorns. So he was telling them that it's only going to get worse, and I'm going to be tougher with you than my father was with this nation. And so this, accepting this advice and making this declaration to the people will prove to be a terrible mistake, because at this point, the northern tribes decided to secede, and they made a new separate kingdom in the north of Israel. So here you could see they seceded. They created a new kingdom, and they called it the Kingdom of Israel. Kingdom of Israel was in the northern part of the land. Now, Rechavam, who was the son of King Solomon, the king of Judah, the king of the south, all he had left was the southern, the southern tribes, the southern area. And that was it. He had the south and Jerusalem. That was basically all he had. The northern lands, the northern kingdom, they appointed a king called Yeravam. You could see that here as well. And Yeravam was the ruler, the leader, the king of the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, which seceded from the south. Now, Yeravam realized that the Jewish people in the north were still very much connected to the south, because you have to realize that the Holy Temple, the Bet HaMikdash, was in the south. It was in the kingdom of Judah, and the Jewish people would go to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the main holidays. They would go. It was a special mitzvah for them to go to Jerusalem and show up and experience the Holy Temple, the Bet HaMikdash, to spend the holidays there. And the king Yeravam understood that because of the strong connection that they still had to Jerusalem, this might bring about a reunification of Israel, of all the 12 tribes, which would then cause him to no longer be the king. Of course, once he had his power, didn't want to let go of his power. So in order to fix this problem, in order to create a certain separation between, a certain disconnect between the north and the south, he decided to do something which obviously the prophets and God was not very happy with. And what he did was he set up new places of worship, alternative places of worship in the north. And so he built two places. One was called Bet El, the other one was called Dan. He set up these idols, golden calves, in these 2 places of worship, and that way he was basically going to make sure that the Jewish people kind of disconnect from the south of Israel. They disconnect with that place, with Jerusalem, with the Holy Temple, and instead bring their sacrifices and do their service in these other alternative places of worship. And that way he could guarantee the separation of the 2 kingdoms. And like this, he could be sure that he'll keep his power for as long as he could. And here in this map, you could see that from 12 lands, and 12 lands that were all united, 12 tribes were made up one country, Israel. This turned into the 2 divided kingdoms. You have the kingdom of the north, which is called Israel. You could see that at the top, and you have the second kingdom, which actually the original kingdom of Judah, which is in the south, which is a much smaller area. He was only left, this king Rechavam was only left with 2 tribes, the south, including Jerusalem, which was the capital. Over the next 240 years, there were 19 different kings in the northern kingdom of Israel. All of these kings were bad. They were corrupt. They were evil. They served idols, and because of their character, and because these kings were who they were, they led the Jewish people to idolatry and to bad ways. This at the time when the Jewish people were, especially in the north, when the Jewish people in the north were weakening spiritually, at the same time they were also weakened militarily, because the country was now divided into 2, so they were not as powerful as they were as one united country. And at the same time that all of this was going on, this separation between the north and the south, the Assyrians in the north were becoming more powerful and becoming stronger. During this time, during this 240-year period, probably especially towards the end of this 240-year period, the Assyrians occupy the territory that's immediately north of Israel. So immediately north of the kingdom of Israel, kingdom where Yeravam was the king. Of course, many years passed, he was no longer the king. There were 18 other kings since then. But in the meantime, the Assyrians occupied the northern territories immediately north of the northern tribes. And today, it would be Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. These are the areas where the Assyrians conquered and where they continued to build their empire. Now, because the Assyrians were conquering so much land, because they were so powerful, they came up with a new idea. They introduced a new way of dealing with conquered people. And what they introduced was a concept called exile. And what that meant was that when they would conquer a territory or a land, they would take the native people, move them someplace else, replace the native people with other people. And by the time the natives figured out where they were, and by the time they figured out what was going on, many years would pass, and they're no longer motivated, and they no longer have the strength and the unity to rebel. So this is the way the Assyrians made sure that they could keep their lands and there'd be no rebellion, because they would send the natives into exile, replace the natives with other people. Starting in the year 575 BCE, the Assyrians begin to conquer the northern lands of Israel. So the most northern tribes. So if we looked at the map that we had earlier, we're talking about the tribes of Zevulun and Naphtali, and they begin with those northern areas, and they take these people and put them in exile. They remove them from their lands, replace them with other people. This is how they did it. And over the next 19 years, they conquered the entire northern section, the entire northern kingdom of Israel, and sent all of the Jews of the northern kingdom into exile. Here we could see this in the text. This is again from the prophets, and this tells us a little bit about. We don't have many verses that talk about the exile and how it happened, but we have some, and here's a text from that. So it says like this: in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, the king of Assyria, the king of Assyria took Samaria and exiled the Israelites to Assyria, and he settled them in Hala, at the river Habor, at the river Gozan, and in the cities of Midia. And so it was that the Israelites sinned against the Lord their God. They worshipped other gods and followed the customs of the nations. God had issued warnings in Israel and Judah through the hand of all the prophets of any vision, saying, repent from your evil ways and observe my commandments and decrees. But they did not listen, and they stiffened their neck. Then God became very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. None remained except the tribe of Judah alone. So here we have the exile of all of the northern tribes. So it's 10 tribes that were exiled, and this is the beginning of the mystery. This is the beginning of the story of the 10 lost tribes. So it was the 10 out of the 12. Now we still have the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, was still going strong. They were still powerful, and they lasted almost 134 years longer than the northern kingdom. And it also happened to be, perhaps this is also the reason, says the prophets, that they lasted for this much longer, because they were not nearly as corrupted, and many of the kings that the Jewish people had in the south, some of them at least, were righteous kings. But in the end, eventually, in the year 434 BCE, it was now the Babylonians who overran the Assyrian Empire, and they marched into Judah as part of their, their campaign to claim all the lands of the former Assyrian Empire. And so in 434 BCE, the Babylonians conquered the southern part of Israel, including Jerusalem, the capital, and all of the Jewish people in the south were then exiled. This exile was, of course, to other lands, to other places. It was mostly to Babylonia, because at this time they were being conquered by the Babylonians. Now, this year 434 BCE is 11 years before the destruction of the first Holy Temple. So there you have a little bit of context. So from King David, if you look at the whole chart now, we have from King David in 877 BCE, they had about 240 years after the split. So the northern kingdom of Israel lasted for about 240 years. The southern kingdom of Israel lasted longer, about 130 years longer than the north. But in the end, 434 BCE, all of Israel was conquered, and 11 years later, the first Holy Temple built by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, was conquered and destroyed. Okay, so now the question becomes, will they return? So before we talk about where they might be and what might have happened to them, let's first find out from the sources that we have. From Jewish sources, are these 10 tribes, are these lost tribes going to return? Now, it's only the 10 tribes that are lost, because it was only the Assyrians who had this idea of separating, not separating, but sending the natives into exile and bringing them to other places. That's what caused these 10 tribes to be lost. However, the southern tribes, the two tribes of Yehuda and Binyamin, and some others, which we'll talk about a bit later, mostly two tribes, their exile was to Babylonia, and they were all together. And the Jewish history that we have until today is from these these two tribes for the most part. So we're left with the 10 lost tribes that were exiled by the Assyrians. Now the question becomes, will they return? Will they come back? And what do the Jewish sources say about these 10 tribes and their return? So if we look into the Talmud, we have a three-way argument, a dispute in the Talmud, whether or not these 10 tribes will be returning. And let's read it together. This is what the Talmud says. First, we have Rabbi Akiva says, the 10 tribes will not return. As the verse says, and the Lord uprooted them from upon their land with fury, anger, and great wrath. And he cast them to another land, as it is this day. Just as a day passes and it will never return, so too they will never be they will be exiled, never to return. So that's Rabbi Akiva's view, that just like a day comes and a day goes, the day never comes back, so too the 10 tribes of Israel, they were lost, never to return. Rabbi Eliezer says, just like a day is followed by darkness and the light later returns, so too, although it will become dark for the 10 tribes, God will ultimately take them out of their darkness. Okay, somehow we're missing the last part of the text, which is the third opinion. It is the opinion of, let me see if I have this in my notes. If I remember correctly, it is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Yes, I have the text in front of me here. Rabbi Shimon says like this, if their deeds are as this day's, they will not return. Otherwise, they shall. So they each take this verse and explain it according to their view. So, well, each of them understand the verse in their unique way, which is why they have a different view. So Rabbi Akiva says they'll never return, just like a day never returns. Rabbi Eliezer says they will return, just like a day comes and a day goes, a new day comes. They will come back, at this next day. And Rabbi Shimon says it depends if their actions are like their bad and wicked ways, then they won't return. But if they become better and if they improve, then they will return. So this is what the Talmud says. We also have, okay, so this is the Talmud. So we have a three-way Talmudic discussion whether or not they'll return. There is also a very interesting prophecy that is found in the prophets, which we'll look at together. And this is a prophecy by Yecheskel, Ezekiel. And this prophecy describes the ultimate reunion between the 10 tribes and the tribe of Judah. Now, we'll look at this prophecy together. And just to explain why it uses the name Ephraim. Ephraim is the one who is represented, at least in this prophecy. All of the 10 tribes are represented by the one tribe of Ephraim. And the reason is because the capital city of the northern kingdom was in the portion of Ephraim. So that's why Ephraim is used here, because Ephraim, it doesn't just mean Ephraim, it means all of the 10 tribes. They are being represented in this prophecy by Ephraim. And here's what it says. So says the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions, and I will place them with him with the stick of Judah, and I will make them into one stick, and they shall become one in my hand. And the sticks upon which you shall write shall be in your hand before their eyes. And say to them, so says the Lord God, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side, and I will bring them to their land, and I will make them into one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be to them all as a king, and they shall no longer be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore. So this is a prophecy which seems to be very clear, that there will in fact be a reunification between all of the tribes of Israel, between the 10 represented by Ephraim and the 2 represented by Judah. So it seems to be very clear that they will be returning at some point because of this prophecy that we just read. Now, while we mentioned this briefly before, but now we're going to talk more at length about it. Most people think, or many people think, that the Jewish people, as we know them today, are descendants from only 2 tribes. Only 2 tribes from the south, which is Yehuda and Benjamin, Judah and Benjamin. The truth is, though, that even while the 10 tribes in the north were conquered and were being sent into exile, some of them managed to escape, or some of them managed to avoid the exile, and they were able to escape into the south, into the southern kingdom of Israel, where they were saved from the Assyrians. They were saved from going into exile. How many were there? So some say it was about 10% of them, some say it was 8%, but it was a fairly good percentage of the 10 tribes that were able to make their way into the south and reunited with the southern kingdom they were integrated with the southern kingdom, and perhaps today this is the reason why we don't know of other tribes amongst us, because they were integrated, and we no longer remember, we no longer know, we no longer have the information as to who these people are. So they integrated into the tribes, and their history became the history of the Jewish people as we know it. So this is one incident that happened, which allowed some of the 10 tribes to avoid the exile, make it back to the Jewish people. They rejoined the Jewish people, and their stories became intertwined for the rest of history, and now they're amongst us. So although for the most part the Jewish people as we know them today are descendants of 2 tribes, but now, as we see, actually more than just 2 tribes, we also have this 8% or 10% of Jewish people from the northern tribes who were able to get away and were able to cross the border into the south, the southern kingdom of Israel. Another interesting thing that happened was the Talmud tells us the story. There was a certain incident that happened with one of the righteous kings in the south, and it was a very scary and shocking incident, because they found a very old Torah scroll, and this Torah scroll, when they opened it, it was open to part of the Torah that was speaking about punishments and speaking about curses because of idol worship and things like that. And the king, who was a very righteous king and took the Torah very seriously, became very distraught and very concerned. What might this Torah? What could this? What kind of message is this? So he called one of the prophets, and the Talmud says that the prophet who he called was not, the main, not the most famous prophet of the time. The most prominent and most important prophet of the time was Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu should have been the one who was called to the king to try to explain and share with the king what the message of this Torah was saying. Talmud says, why did the king call this other prophet? He didn't call Yirmiyahu. The reason, the Talmud says, is because Yirmiyahu was on a divine mission to go to the exile and bring home the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes. This is what the Talmud says. Now, the fact is that he was successful in his mission, at least to some degree, and he did bring back some of the exiled Jews of the northern kingdom of Israel, brought them to the south. At this time, it was towards the end of the kingdom of the southern kingdom as well. So many years have passed, but Yirmiyahu went, to bring back these lost Jews and these lost tribes. And we don't know how many he brought back, but he certainly brought back some. So probably most of them remained in exile, but certainly some of them came back home. They too joined up with the rest of the Jewish people, and their history became the history of the southern kingdom of the Jewish people as we know them today. So here we have these two incidents where a good percentage of the Jewish people from the northern kingdom were managed to escape and managed to join back up with the southern kingdom, with the rest of the Jewish people, and we still have descendants of these people today. Now, it was not the majority who were able to escape. It was probably a small portion, but certainly would be a very large number of people. So it was 10% approximately of the 10 tribes at the time of the exile, before going into exile. approximately 10% were able to escape. And then there was some percentage of Jewish people that Yirmiyahu was able to bring back when he went on this divine mission to bring the lost tribes, the exiled tribes, back home. Now, in light of the above, now that we know these two episodes, the 10% that escaped immediately, and then the other Jews who managed to come at a later point together with Yirmiyahu, now we could better understand this Talmudic dispute between the three sages we had. We had Rabbi Eliezer, we had Rabbi Akiva, and we had Rabbi Shimon. So two of them, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon, made it clear that either they would certainly, the 10 tribes would certainly be coming back. They'd certainly be returning to the Jewish people. Rabbi Shimon said it was dependent on their behavior and their righteousness. And Rabbi Eliezer said it was regardless that they would come back. It was only Rabbi Akiva who said that they would not come back. Now, this seems to be a very unusual position for Rabbi Akiva to take, especially because we have this prophecy that we read together, this prophecy that says that there will be this reunification. So how could Rabbi Akiva say that they're not going to come back? And perhaps once we know about these two episodes, we could say that according to Rabbi Akiva, the people who were supposed to come back already came back. So it was they are included in this percentage of Jews, this 10% who came back immediately, and this other unknown number of Jews who came back together with Yirmiyahu. So it could be that Rabbi Akiva is still his opinion is still consistent with the prophecy because according to Rabbi Akiva, perhaps all of the ones who were supposed to come back already came back. You have to remember that Rabbi Akiva was a sage of the Mishnah, so he was living at a later time. So it'd be possible that he's referring to the future, that nobody else will come back in the future. But we have this three-way dispute in the Talmud, and it seems to be there is no clear halacha, there's no clear Jewish ruling about who is the ruling according to, but it seems the conclusion seems to be that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who is the one who it goes according to, that the Jewish people, the 10 lost tribes, will ultimately return. But nevertheless, it's important to understand Rabbi Akiva, it's important to understand Rabbi Shimon, even though the halacha, the Jewish law, if we could call it the Jewish law, because it's not clear, but it seems to be that Rabbi Eliezer is the accepted opinion, it's the accepted approach, but nevertheless, this would explain Rabbi Akiva, perhaps Rabbi Shimon as well, even though Rabbi Eliezer is the one who is accepted. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that the Jewish people will return, all of the lost tribes. And I'd like to share with you some of what the Talmud says. The Talmud does mention some of the places where, well, actually the verses that we read earlier mention some of the cities, some of the locations where the lost tribes were. Of course, the names of the places are no longer the same, but the Talmud mentions these places and kind of places these locations in what we now know to be Iraq, Iran, and Syria. There are also some alternative locations that are mentioned in the Medrash, also mentioned in the Talmud, and one of those places they call Afriki, which is commonly translated as Africa. So it could be any number of places, and these are very large regions, and of course a very long time passed since then. So just because we know these general regions, it doesn't mean necessarily that we know exactly where they are. But I'd like to show you this Medrash, and I'll share my screen again. Back to this presentation, we could see some of what the Medrash says. Oops. No. For some reason, it didn't make it in either. Okay, I apologize. I should have it in my notes though. I don't know why it's not in the presentation that I prepared a short while ago. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay, so here is the text from the Medrash. It's just a few sentences, so I'll read it for you, and it says like this. To 3 places were the 10 tribes exiled. Some were exiled to the Sambatyon River. Another group was exiled to distant land behind the Sambatyon River. This land was twice as far from Israel as the first. The third group was swallowed in Rivlatha. I don't know if I'm reading that correctly. God will say to the prisoners, go forth to those who are exiled to the Sambatyon River. And he will say to them, the ones that are in darkness, show yourselves to those exiled to distant land behind the Sambatyon River. I'm just showing you this text, not that it's very clear what the Medrash is saying. Sometimes the Medrash speaks in riddles, sometimes the Medrash is very cryptic, but there are some locations that the Talmud mentions, that the Medrash mentions. There's this theory about the Sambatyon River, which is a very unusual river that it talks about in the Talmud and talks about in other places. It's this mysterious river, but you see this river is mentioned here. The name is the Sambatyon River. We're not really going to talk about that, but we do see that there are some locations that are mentioned here in the Medrash and the Talmud. Now I'd like to fast forward about 1,500 years. 1,500 years in the late 9th century. There was a man called Eldad Hadani. He showed up in a Jewish community. I don't remember what it was called then, but today it would be in Tunisia. He claimed to come from a land called Chavila, which is near the Sambatyon River. Sambatyon River, remember we just saw that mentioned in the Medrash. So he claimed to come from this city near this river. And he claimed that there were 4 tribes there, 4 of the lost tribes. He also claimed to have traveled extensively and met Jewish people from some of the other tribes as well. So this man, Eldad, shows up in this Jewish community after 1,500 years of the 10 tribes being lost. So they don't know exactly what to make of this man's story, of Eldad's story. And what they do is they ask him some questions, and then they write their dilemma to a famous rabbi whose name was Rabbi Tzemach Bar Chaim. He was known as the Gaon of Sura, who lived in Babylonia at the time. There was very famous yeshiva in Babylonia at the time. There were still Jews living there. And this rabbi was the leader of world Jewry at the time. And they wrote in their letter to this rabbi that Eldad does not speak any of the other languages. He only speaks Hebrew. But the Hebrew that he speaks contains many words that we never heard of, and they give some examples of the words, and they tested him over a few days, and he was repeating the same words for the same items, words that the Jewish people in this community have never heard of. Also, they wrote to this rabbi in Babylonia that whenever he would, of course, they questioned him to ask him about his traditions and the Torah, and whenever Eldad would say something from the tradition, from the Torah Sheba'al Peh, from the oral tradition, he would always begin with the words, "So have we learned from Yehoshua, who received it from Moses, who received it from God." So this is the way that he studied the Torah. Every law or every tradition that he shared, he began with this introduction. And they wrote all of this in their letter, plus a lot more. They wrote in their letter to this rabbi in Babylonia to see, whether or not they could accept his story as authentic or not. What they also included in their letter was that it seemed to them that their Torah was one and the same. The Torah that the Jewish community had and the Torah that Eldad had was the same Torah. There were some small differences, they said, and they explained and described some of those small differences. But they said it seems that for the most part, it's the same tradition and it's the same Torah. Now, Rabbi Tzemach responded after hearing all of the details of the story. He said that Eldad's story was in fact consistent with Jewish tradition, and the inaccuracies that there were perhaps in the story, he said he attributed those differences, at least some of the differences and some of the mistakes perhaps, to Eldad's travels and difficulties and his hardships. And so this is from Rabbi Tzemach, who was one of the leaders, or the leader of world Jewry at the time. He accepted this testimony of Eldad Hadani from the name Dan, from the tribe of Dan. And so he informed the Rabbi Tzemach shared with the community that in fact it should be accepted. Now, the authenticity of Eldad's story, of course, this became a very famous story, and anyone who's going to share anything about the 10 lost tribes is always going to have Eldad's story included in whatever a theory it might be. But Eldad's story was in fact debated throughout the Middle Ages. Some dismissed the story as fantasy, but it seems that there's a general consensus that of rabbis who validate the story and use the story and rely on the story to make halachic rulings in Jewish law. And I'd like to share with you an example from a very famous rabbi called the Ravid, a 16th century rabbi, and I'll share with you the text. Okay, here it is. But those Jews who come from the land of Cush are without doubt from the tribe of Dan. And since they did not have in their midst sages who were masters of the tradition, they clung to the simple meaning of the scriptures. If they had been taught, however, they would not be irreverent towards the words of our sages, so their status is comparable to a Jewish infant taken captive by non-Jews, right, who wouldn't have the opportunity to experience Judaism and to know the Torah. And even if you say that the matter is in doubt, it is a commandment to redeem them. So there was a question of some slaves. At this time, there were slaves, and they were saying that these slaves were from the tribe of Dan. And they were asking this rabbi, the Radbaz, if they're whether or not they're actually Jews. And what the Radbaz said was that they are in fact Jews, and therefore, once you redeem them, once you save them from their slavery, they should be included and accepted in the Jewish community as authentic Jews. Okay, so I'd like to again fast forward to the later part of the 20th century, and the story now moves to Ethiopia, mostly in the northern part of Ethiopia, also the northwestern part of the country, over a very large section of northern Ethiopia, across hundreds of small villages alongside Muslim populations and Christian populations, there were many Ethiopians who practiced a certain form of Judaism, which is somewhat different to the Judaism, to the version that we know today. Now, these people, these Ethiopians, claimed to be Jews, and they claimed to be from the tribe of Dan as well. And in the later part of the 20th century, I don't know exactly the year, they began to make contact with Jewish communities, outside of Ethiopia. And when doing so, they also mentioned and they cited the story of Eldad Hadani. They included that, but they were saying that they're from the same tribe. They're from the tribe of Dan. Now the question once again arose: what is the status of these people? Are these Ethiopians? Are they descendants of the tribe of Dan? Are they descendants of the 10 lost tribes, and are they Jewish? So in 1973, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel ruled that these Ethiopians were in fact Jews and that they should be brought back to Israel. Over the next couple of years, there were many other rabbis who confirmed the same ruling. Many rabbis, including the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel, they all ruled that these Ethiopians were in fact Jews. Now, some of the rabbis said that just to be sure, they should go through a process which is called Safek Giyur, a process which is basically conversion just to be sure. So to go through a very quick process of conversion, just so that everyone knows, beyond any shadow of doubt, and that nobody in the future should question their status, so they should go through this process. But everybody, all of the rabbis, agreed that they were in fact Jews, in Israel, both chief rabbis made this ruling, and in fact, in 1977, the Israeli government passed a law granting the right of return to these Ethiopian Jews and giving them the right to Israeli citizenship. And the Israeli and American governments organized transport operations to Israel. Many of them were these secret operations, bringing them from Ethiopia in different ways to the land of Israel. By the end of 2008, there were almost 120,000 Jews of Ethiopian descent living in Israel. So, of course, there is still tremendous mystery surrounding the story of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and what we know about them is really very little. And the people who were saved, the people who came back, were a small percentage, either the ones who came back immediately or within the next 100 years, together with the prophet Yirmiyahu. So some of them came back, a small number came back, back then, and now we know that there are, these Ethiopian Jews, which again is a small number compared to what it could be. And of course, there are many theories about where they could be. There's theories about the Far East. There's all different types of theories. I'm sure if you Google, you could find many different theories as to the whereabouts of the 10 tribes. But everything that we shared here today is, as we saw in the text, we were basing it off pieces of the Talmud, of the prophets, of prominent rabbis and leaders of world Jewry who were writing and answering questions. the Talmud sharing some of the backstory, the prophets sharing some of the backstory of what happened. So so this is all of the details that we know, which is not very many, but the details that we do know, we could find some of them in the words of the sages and the writings of the sages, the Talmud, the Medrash, prophecies, and so on. Of course, there's still a tremendous amount of mystery, and for sure, over so many hundreds of years, we don't know what happened for sure, and we don't know what happened to the rest. But regardless of the current status of all of the missing Jews of the lost 10 tribes today, God had already decreed that ultimately they will return. They will return in the time of Mashiach. We saw it earlier in one of the prophecies. There are other prophecies as well. The Rambam Maimonides writes that one of the things that Mashiach will accomplish, besides for bringing peace to the world and for doing many other things, one of the things that Mashiach will do, one of the most important things that Mashiach will accomplish, is the gathering of all Jewish people from all corners of the earth, uniting all of the Jewish people as one nation, as one people, all together. And of course, no Jew will be left behind. Everyone is included in this prophecy. Everyone is included in this idea that Mashiach is going to bring everyone home without any exceptions. And we'll just finish off with a prophecy that says like this. I have the text just in front of me. The text says like this. This is from the prophets. It shall come to pass on that day that a great shofar shall be sounded. This is referring to Mashiach blowing the shofar. And those lost in the land of Assyria and those exiled in the land of Egypt shall come, and they shall prostrate themselves before the Lord on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. So we have various prophecies, we have various ideas from the Rambam, from other writings. We know that all of the Jewish people will come back. Ultimately, they'll all be gathered together as one united nation. The 10 tribes are going to be reunited with the coming of Mashiach. So this is just another reason to pray for Mashiach. We have many reasons to pray for Mashiach. Mashiach is going to be a time when there's only peace, when there's only harmony, a time of no pain, no suffering, no sickness. But now we know something else that Mashiach will accomplish, the gathering of all Jews, including all the lost Jews. And this will be at a time when the world reaches its perfection, reaches its ultimate status, and the purpose for which it was created, and the purpose of the world will be realized with the coming of Mashiach.